Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Why Cold in Place Recycling, Why Now? Before I introduce our two speakers, I just want to cover a few housekeeping topics. Today's webinar is being recorded and we'll be sharing a link with you after the event. We welcome you to revisit the content yourself and share it with colleagues as well. We also invite your questions and comments. If at any point you have a question for the speakers, please use the Q&A box on your screen. This can be found at the bottom of your screen. You may type your question here and we'll either pose it to the speakers at that time or hold it for the end of the event. Dan, at this time, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Christy, and welcome everyone. There, I got my video working now. Thank you, Christy, and welcome everyone. We appreciate you being here today. The last I saw our registration list, we had about 60 attendees planning to be here, so that's tremendous. Really looking forward to telling you about cold in place recycling and answering your questions about the process. We know that all of you have a lot on your plates right now, and especially have a lot on your minds right now. So we appreciate you carving an hour of your day out to spend with us. We would, of course, much rather be with you in person, face-to-face at your facility, or maybe our whole big group that we have assembled here today at a conference someplace. But of course, those gatherings are going to have to wait for a while longer. So we decided to do our first ever Indus webinar. And I've certainly attended a lot of webinars, but this is the first one that we've presented ourselves. So admittedly, a little outside our comfort zone. Not that comfortable at all talking into a computer screen, and hope actually I never get comfortable talking into a computer screen, but we're going to do the best we can today. And again, thank you for joining us today. Before we get started with a slideshow that we have prepared for you, I wanted to introduce my co-host and the moderator for today's event. That's Art Baker. Art is the Indus Regional Manager who takes care of Indus clients in Western Massachusetts, all of Vermont, a little portion of Southwestern New Hampshire, and a portion of Northeastern Connecticut. Art and I have a couple of things in common. One, we're both ex-public works directors. I spent 10 years of my career from 1992 to 2002 as the town commissioner of public works for the town of Walkill in Orange County, New York. And Art spent 11 years of his career as a public works director in towns in Connecticut and Massachusetts. The second thing Art and I have in common is we're both, I guess I'll call it, pavement management geeks. We actually take great joy and get great satisfaction from helping municipalities stretch their limited funds to get the best possible condition rating they can with their network of roads. Actually, all of us at Indus enjoy doing that, and that's what drives us every day. So let me introduce Art, and I'll ask Art if he could do a few things for us here this morning. First, maybe give us a little sketch of the group of people that we have. What states are they from? You know, what kind of agencies are they with? Secondly, maybe share the results of the 2 poll questions we asked as people jumped on with us today. And then third, maybe tell the attendees how they can ask questions as we go through the presentation today. And lastly, maybe just give a little introduction to the interview you're going to do later with your client from Westfield. Art?
Great, thanks Dan, and welcome everybody. Glad you all could make it. For those of you who still came in a little bit late, just to reiterate, you should see a couple poll questions up on your screen. If you could answer those, and I'll get to the results here in a minute. If you have a question today, don't be shy, feel free to ask a question. Make sure you do it on the Q&A session down at the bottom. The chat may or may not be live, but we want the questions to come in on the Q&A so we don't lose track of them. And we'll try to get you the answers as we go. If we can't get to them and we'd run out of time, somebody will get back to you on your answer if we don't get it answered today. As Dan mentioned, later in the show, I will be putting my client Fran Kane from Westfield. We're going to be having a little discussion about 3 of the projects that he's done. He started a program in 2018, and I want you guys all to hear the experiences that Fran has had with this process. As far as today's attendance, as Dan mentioned, we have over 50 attendees representing, it looks a little over 40 different municipalities and encompassing 5 different states, which is excellent. We also have a couple consultants with us here today, so welcome to everybody. We really appreciate your interest, and I truly believe you'll find a lot of value in today's session. Now onto the poll results. Looks like 35% of you have done hot in place recycling. 80% of you have done a minor mill and fill. 60% of you have done a major mill and fill. 25%, only 25% has done cold in place recycling. So this will be a great opportunity for everyone to learn more about that process. And then of course, 85% of you have done full depth reclamation. And that's a treatment that most people have done in the past. And I think you'll find some of your roads you'll be able to substitute with cold in place recycling today. Question number 2, 35% of you have actually seen the cold in place recycling process in process, and 65% of you haven't seen it at all. So again, great opportunity for learning today. And with that, Dan, I'll turn it back over to you.
Very good. Thank you, Art. So let's jump right into the slideshow we prepared for you. You know, we're all in this together. Before our day-to-day thoughts were all consumed with the COVID-19 virus, we knew we had bad roads, a lot of rough roads out there. And when the COVID virus is behind us and we have a vaccine, guess what? We're still going to have a lot of bad roads. So that's the problem we all need to solve together. Not sure whether you've seen this statistic here or not, the $603 per year per vehicle in damage caused by rough roads. I'd seen that a few times in the past, and I always thought maybe it was an exaggerated statistic, but I was on a webinar 2 or 3 weeks ago where the executive director for TRIP, the source of this data, was one of the presenters, and he explained that a big chunk of that $603 is accelerated vehicle depreciation, and that makes sense. Just the wear and tear on our vehicles is a result of driving over some of the poor roads that we drive over. But we're not here to talk about problems today. We want to focus on solutions. And we truly believe that cold in place recycling is a great solution to cost effectively address many of our poor roads. In fact, if you were to ask me for a 1-sentence definition or description on what is cold in place recycling, I think my 1 sentence would be, it's a cost effective solution to fix bad roads. That in a nutshell is cold in place recycling. And as we go through the slides here today, I think you'll agree with me. So our number 1 goal with this webinar going into it was to answer your questions about cold in place recycling. So our agenda for our presentation today is to answer these 5 questions that we commonly hear as we travel across the Northeast, talking to folks about cold in place recycling. And of course, we want to answer any that you have over the course of the event as well. The first question that we'll often hear is, what do you mean when you say CIR with foamed asphalt? What are you talking about? We have a tendency to throw around a lot of technical terminology and acronyms, and sometimes we don't take a breath, slow down, and make sure everybody knows what we mean when we say CIR with foamed asphalt. So we'll start off by answering that question. Then we'll look at some roads and talk about where the CIR process is best used. We've all heard the saying, right road, right treatment for right road at the right time. We want you to know what the right roads are for CIR. The third question we'll answer is, how do we take those old, aged, and pavements that are falling apart and strengthen them, stabilizing them? We're going to talk about the stabilization agents that we use in the process and how we determine how much of those agents to put in during the process. The fourth question we'll address is we'll take you step by step through a project, almost like you were building it in your community. What we do when we start the project and how it gets finished up. Then we'll take a break from answering questions to introduce one of Art's clients, Fran Kane from out in Westfield, Mass. The town of Westfield has now done 3 cold-in-place recycling projects with us, totaling 7.5 miles, as Art mentioned earlier. So we thought it would be helpful for you to hear directly from a public agency standpoint what their experience has been with the CIR process. And then we'll conclude by looking at the list of what we think are the primary benefits of doing cold-in-place recycling. So let's first answer this question. What the heck do we mean when we say CIR with foamed asphalt? Well, essentially, CIR is creating millings, but instead of trucking all those millings away and putting them in a big stockpile someplace, like we often see as we drive through highway projects, we take those millings and we add new stabilizing materials to them and then lay them back down on the same pavement, all in one continuous operation. The workhorse of the cold-in-place recycling process is this machine here. It's a Workin 3800, and it looks just like any big milling machine you'd see out on a highway project that you're driving through, with 2 key differences. One is the direction of travel and the drum rotation. If this was a milling job, this machine would be going right to left in this picture, and that conveyor would be feeding trucks to take those millings away and put in a stockpile someplace. This being a recycling project, the machine's moving left to right, and that means that the machine, instead of upcutting, like it would be doing in a milling process to get as much material out as quickly as possible, the drum in this machine is downcutting. And what that does is enable us to size the wrap particles the way we want them sized, definitely much smaller than we want for milling, where we're just trying to get material out as quickly as possible. The second difference between this operation and the milling operation, you might notice this silver hose connection, probably about a 4-inch diameter hose connected over here in the lower right-hand corner of the photo. That hose is connected to this asphalt tanker. The asphalt tanker contains liquid asphalt binder, a PG64 asphalt binder heated up to 320, 330 degrees Fahrenheit. That liquid asphalt binder is pumped back through that hose connection into the cutter housing on the machine. This picture on the left-hand side, that's where the cutter housing is located, where the actual milling head is. The milling head is 12.5 feet wide. So what that enables us to do is recycle an entire lane width in one pass, which is very convenient. And across the width of that milling head, there's 18 of these nozzles that you see in this schematic on the right-hand side. What happens with those nozzles, this is where the foaming of the asphalt occurs. So we pump in the asphalt, and it's generally about 2 to 2.5% liquid asphalt cement by weight of the wrap that we're stabilizing. That and a little bit of water, just a slight mist of water. I think it's generally about 2, maybe 3% by weight of the liquid asphalt cement, just enough to cause it to essentially explode. You know what happens when you put a little bit of water in a hot oil in a frying pan? It has a tendency to explode. Well, that's what's happening with these nozzles here. And then a little bit of compressed air. And the end result is we take that liquid asphalt and we expand its volume in a bubbly form to about 15 times its original size. So just think about that for a second. If you took a 1-gallon jug or can of liquid asphalt cement, you foam it up and all of a sudden it's like you have 15 gallons of bubbles. Now what all those foamed asphalt bubbles do is they grab fine particles from the millings inside the cutter housing and create little mortar balls, if you will, that then go and act as spot wells to stick larger wrap particles together. So just think, if you would, about, say, a mason that takes a trowel full of mortar and uses that to stick 2 bricks or 2 concrete blocks together. That's what we're doing with this process. We're not trying to continuously coat, like you would with brand new blacktop, continuously coat every wrap particle or every aggregate particle. We're trying to create these mortar balls to spot weld the larger aggregate together. The big advantage to that is that it slows the rate of reflective cracking by not having that continuous coating. And as you think about the problem that we're always fighting in this climate of ours is reflective cracking. Seems like you're always fighting them. So this foamed asphalt process reduces that rate of reflective cracking. The other big advantage of foamed asphalt, it also allows us to put traffic on it more quickly than other processes. So that's what the foamed asphalt looks like as a close-up of the material being created. And at the end of the day, this is the actual CIR layer that we're building on the job. This layer was, as you can see, about 4.5 inches thick, and it was created on Pond Street in Braintree, about a half mile or so down the road from our office. That was the first job that we ever did. We did it back in August of 2017. And this chunk of material was taken from the road when we were raising all the utility structures back to grade after recycling. And we'll explain that to you later on. But when I saw the chunks of material being removed to raise those castings back to grade, I said, hey, there's no better way to explain to people what CIR with foamed asphalt is than to show them a chunk of that material right there. Very solid, very stable, a real long-lasting and durable type repair.
And we've had a question that came in.
Fire away.
So the question is, can asphalt emulsion be used instead of foamed asphalt in the CIR process?
Yes, it can. In fact, those are the two the primary ways to stabilize CIR, either with asphalt emulsion or with foamed asphalt. Our machine, the Workin 3800 that I showed earlier, it's capable of stabilizing either with foamed asphalt or emulsion, can do either one. We've chosen every job we've done thus far, I think we've done 29 jobs, every single one of those has been done with foamed asphalt, and we think that's the best process for our clients, best process for those reasons I just mentioned. You can traffic it more quickly, as most people want to do. You can pave it more quickly because there's no water to cure out of the mat like you have with emulsions. And secondly, you have that non-continuous coating of the wrap particles is going to slow the rate of reflective cracking. So we think for our clients, the foamed asphalt is the preferred method of stabilization and probably more beneficial than asphalt emulsion stabilization. Any other questions before I keep going?
Nope, go ahead. That's all we have for now. Don't be shy, guys. Don't be afraid to ask a question.
All right, so what kind of roads are this CIR process used on? And probably the best way to answer that is in two ways. Let's first look at the asphalt deterioration curve. You've all seen this or some variation of it before. And you know that we're typically out advocating for keeping good roads in good condition with preventive maintenance treatments, the ones shown at the top of this curve. And the reason we advocate for those is simple. As a pavement manager, those are your best bang for your buck. It costs way less to maintain a network over time if you keep the good roads good and aren't spending all your money fixing bad roads. But at the same time, we're realists and we understand every community has at least a few bad roads. And as we thought of how we could possibly service our clients better, we looked for opportunities that we could get involved with at the bottom half of the curve. And when I'm talking about the bottom half of the curve, I'm really talking about this range right here between mill and overlay and hot mix shims and overlays down to full depth reclamation and reconstruction. It's this range right here. You can see there's a big gap in the types of roads that would either get mill and fill or overlays or full depth reclamation. I mentioned earlier that I'd spent 10 years of my career as a public works director in New York, and every year I probably did, I don't know, 4 or 5 of these full depth reclamation jobs. And I can tell you the politicians and the residents all loved them. You know, we'd take the worst roads in town, we'd full depth reclaim them, pave them, and we were all done. Everybody was happy, ribbon cuttings and smiles all around. Really just 2 big problems with those type projects. One was the impact on through traffic and the residents, abutting residents. Typically, we'd have to shut the roads down for large parts of the project. projects, and we'd have a lot of issues with small lower slung cars getting out of adjacent driveways when we were doing the reclaim process itself. And the second big problem we experienced was paying for them. This was 20, 25 years ago when I was doing these jobs, and at the time, I don't recall what I was paying, but I typically did stabilized FBR. I figured I had the road torn up. I might as well put either some emulsion or some Portland cement or some foamed asphalt. In fact, the last of the jobs I did were mostly all foamed asphalt back in the late 90s. I might as well put that in then instead of having to rebuild the road sooner because it wasn't strong enough. But in today's dollars, those type projects are probably 30 or 35 bucks a square yard. So writing the checks was pretty painful. So I think what's happened and what we see quite often is we have communities that don't want to impact the residents and the traffic with that process. They don't want to spend the money it takes to do that process. They take a road like this, and this was a road that we took a picture of a couple of years ago, and they just mill off 1.5 inches, 2 inches and repave it. I'm not sure that's the best solution there. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's not the best solution. That might give you a 5-6 year service life, but I think we all know that most of those cracks are going to reflect right through that thin overlay pretty quickly. This is a picture sent to me just last week. Same thing. You know, probably the community didn't want to spend the money rebuilding the road. So they're putting what I would call a Band-Aid repair on, a thin mill and fill when the road is really just too far deteriorated. So we're not going to get the service life out of that mill and fill treatment that we used to get. When I started as a director back in the early 90s, it was pretty common to get 15 years out of a mill and fill. That was kind of the standard answer. But I can guarantee you with today's asphalt quality, which is not as good as it used to be back 20, 30 years ago, combined with our candidate selection, this road right here is not going to last 15 years. So that's the spot on the curve where cold in place recycling is appropriate. When it's a little too far beat up for a mill and fill, but not beat up enough to justify full depth reclamation, that's when we like to do FBR. And here's a few pictures of good CIR candidates. You can see this road. You wouldn't want to do a thin mill and fill here, and it certainly doesn't need FBR. Here's a second one. This was taken from that Pond Street job that I mentioned we did back in 2017. The right-hand side, up in the upper right-hand corner of the picture, you can see that side of the road has been recycled. This is the distresses that were out there before we recycled. And here's a job that we did in early 2018. This was for the Massachusetts DOT north of Boston and Manchester by the Sea. A lot of pavement managers will look at that existing pavement. The left lane, as we look at this picture, was already recycled. The right lane is still to be done. I think a lot of pavement managers would look at that and say, oh, that's an FDR road. And that's exactly what we want to have people understand today. You don't always need to do FDR to a bad road. This was a perfect cold in place recycling candidate at probably half the cost of FDR.
Dan, can I interrupt you for 1 minute? We've had several questions come in.
Yeah, fire away.
So the first one was, what is the foamed asphalt made of? I think you might have come on a little bit late. We covered that a little bit at the beginning, but just maybe talk about the difference between the foamed asphalt and the emulsion.
Sure, foamed asphalt is just asphalt, except we mixed into it 2 or 3% water and a little bit of compressed air to get that foaming action that allows us to create those mortar balls and bind the large particles together. So it's really, it's almost 100% asphalt cement. Emulsion, on the other hand, most emulsions are about 2/3 asphalt cement, 1/3 water. So when you think about if you're going to stabilize a 3 to 5 inch thick layer of CIR, that's the typical depth of the process, then you've got as much as 5 inches of material there that's got a bunch of water in it. It's got to cure out before you put the wearing course on. Well, it's one of the reasons why we've gone the foamed asphalt route.
Great. And then the next one kind of goes into that. They're wondering, do you need to top the CIR immediately? And if not, how long do you wait before doing so? And I think that's a good timing for that question because it's different between the emulsion and the foamed asphalt process.
It is, yeah. Every cold in place recycling job, whether you use emulsion or whether you use foamed asphalt, needs a wearing course because that wearing course is going to seal out the moisture from getting in and degrading that recycled material. This recycled material has a relatively high air content. I think it's about 10 to 12% air voids in a typical CIR mix. So it could be susceptible to moisture damage if we didn't seal it up. So every job gets a wearing course. One of the advantages of foamed asphalt is you could pave it, I'd say even the next day, depending on the weather conditions, because we put so little water in. We put a little bit of compaction water in, but that's it. So depending on atmospheric conditions and depending on whether any utilities have to be adjusted prior to paving, you can pave it within a couple of days pretty easily. With emulsions, I think, again, it depends on atmospheric conditions, but they generally end up waiting, I don't know, a week or 2 weeks. I don't have a lot of experience having done those, but I would say a 1 week minimum before you'd want to pave it.
Great. And then one more, Dan, that's kind of the right timing for your presentation. Can you explain where the increased size foamed asphalt goes?
Increase, yeah, it goes. So that's being injected, shot into those millings as they're tumbling around inside that cutter housing. So it's in there. So it's typically being injected at a rate of about anywhere between 2 and 2.5% by weight of the wrap. So volumetrically, it fits within inside that cutter housing. It fits and is being mixed inside the cutter housing. All right.
And there's a few other questions, but we're going to get to those toward the end. You'll answer those toward the end. Let's continue.
Yeah, I better. I'm not going to get through the program, so let me get going. So what are good CIR candidates? The first thing we always want to make sure we do is go out and verify that we have enough thickness of existing asphalt. As I just mentioned, most CIR jobs get recycled to a depth of anywhere between 3 and 5 inches. So you want to have as an absolute minimum about 3 inches, preferably 4 or 5 inches to do a CIR job. But we have found a workaround, and that's if you have either thin section of pavement on a roadway or the entire road is thin, you can do one of two things. You can add wrap. I know some communities are sitting on big stockpiles of wrap, so we can process that and spread a layer of that ahead of the recycler and blend it in with the existing pavement to make the final product thicker. Or you can add new virgin adstone. And Art actually had experience doing that on one of his jobs, so I'll let him share that experience with you.
Yes, so we had a unique experience down in Westfield, and when I introduced Fran at the end of the presentation, he'll talk a little bit more about it. But we had on Shaker Road in Westfield, we had a 2.2 mile section of road that we did, and the middle 2,000 feet of this road only showed 2 inches of asphalt in the cores, where the remainder of the road was 6 to 8 inches. So in that 2-inch section, we had to do another set of cores, another mix design. With the stone, we added a layer of 3/4 inch stone that was recycled in with the existing wrap, and of course the new liquid asphalt and the new Portland cement to fit in with the rest of the road.
Thanks, Art. And here's a quick picture of that happening. So you can see there's a layer, there's been on this job, a couple-inch layer of crushed stone added on the pavement before the recycler comes along, and that's going to be blending that in with that existing pavement. It's important to point out that this process adds strength, adds structure to the old beat-up pavement. So the sketch on the left would be a brand new pavement. The sketch on the right, an older one. For those of you that have maybe not been familiar with how pavements are designed, engineers typically look at the traffic loads. They convert those traffic loads into what they call easels, and then they come up with a structural number required to carry those traffic loads over the design life, 20, 25 years of the pavement. And every layer of the pavement has some different strength or structural coefficient assigned to it, as you see in the column on the left of each of those diagrams. So what they do is they multiply those coefficients times the thickness of each layer, and then they tally up the totals for all the layers to come up with a structural number. So you can see on the left, that brand new pavement started with a structural number of around 2.5, but over time, the asphalt layers deteriorate and the structural coefficient is reduced, the strength's reduced. And that just makes sense as the binder starts to crack and get dry and brittle. Most engineers estimate it goes down to the range of 0.20 on the surface where it's getting the most exposure to ultraviolet, down to 0.25. And that might take 20 years, 15 years, 25 years, some long period of time, but the road does get weaker. And for this example, you can see it got about 30% weaker. So let's just assume for a second that we take all 4 inches of the asphalt on top and recycle it. Once the coefficient has been reduced, let's recycle all 4 inches, and the recycled layer has a coefficient of around a 3.5, and put 1.5 inches of new hot mix on it. Look at the structural number of that reclaimed pavement with an overlay. It's getting up close to 3, even stronger than the original pavement, because we've strengthened the aged oxidized pavement and added another 1.5 inches. So we're not only making roads smoother, but we're also making them stronger. And if you want to learn more about the structural coefficients, you can find those on roadresource.org, a new website called roadresource.org. And on that website, there's a thing called the structural calculator, and you can compare different road rehabilitation options and what their structural capacity might be. So what's involved? It's a stronger pavement. What's involved in making the stronger pavement? Really 2 stabilization agents that we use. The first one being that foamed asphalt. In its unfoamed condition, it's what it looks like on the left, and Portland cement, which you see on the right. How do we determine how much of each of those new materials to add to the job? Well, what we do is we go out and we extensively core every road that we're going to do. We core it end to end and side to side, getting cores from the middle, from the edges. We want to have a comprehensive understanding of the existing pavement thickness so we can work with a client on agreeing on an appropriate recycle thickness and also an appropriate overlay wearing course option. We then ship, and it takes, to do a mix design, it takes somewhere between 350 pounds of the existing pavement from the roadway. We ship those cores out to our lab in St. Paul, Minnesota, where they have one of these work-in mix design machines. In the middle of this machine, where that black handle is, on top of the silver lid, that's where they put the asphalt cement, and they experiment with some different asphalt temperatures, liquid asphalt temperatures, different amounts of foaming water to get the optimum temperature and foaming water amounts. And on the left is a hopper with some blades in it, and that replicates the cutter housing on the recycling machine. So they take those cores that we ship to them and they grind them up in the lab and produce millings to the same sort of gradation as what the milling machine we use in the field uses. You can see in this case, they've got about a 10,000 gram sample of those millings. Put them in that hopper. They add the Portland cement, about 1% by weight of the wrap to that. They shoot in the foamed asphalt from the center portion of that lab machine. And they create this series of testing plugs, if you will. They do different asphalt contents, usually 3, sometimes 4 different asphalt contents to see which asphalt content works the best. They put these plugs in a curing oven. They stay in there for 3 days, 72 hours. They come out, half of the plugs get soaked in water for 24 hours. And then all the plugs get broken by this machine. It's called an indirect tensile strength machine, or ITS machine. And they determine at what strength the material breaks. And when they're all done analyzing the materials and the different combinations of asphalt cement, they send us a 4 or 5 page mix design report. And the main focus from those mix design reports is on this chart of numbers. And the 3, so you can see for this particular job, they analyze 3 different foamed asphalt percentages, 1.5, 2, and 2.5. That's these numbers across the top right here. And they looked at all kinds of different stuff that we don't have time to get into today. But the main things we're looking for are the indirect tensile strength for the soaked samples and for the dry samples. And you can see over on the right is the minimum specification, 30 PSI for the soaked samples, 45 for the dry ones. And we also want to look at Marshall stability. There's certainly such a thing as putting too much asphalt cement into a mix. You'll see it start to become unstable and want to move around. So we're looking for the best combination of strengths and stability. And these minimums came out of a Wisconsin DOT spec. That's the spec that we're using in this area. That's the spec that Massachusetts DOT has decided to adopt. And the reason we chose to use it, and Mass DOT decided to use it as well, is Wisconsin DOT has been doing foamed asphalt CIR for about 10 years now, I think, very successfully. We figured they're a harsh, wet freeze climate, kind of like we are here in the Northeast, so it would be a good spec to start with, and it served us well. So now I'd like to just take you real quickly, unless there's another question or two that would be appropriate to answer, Art.
There's several questions here, but you're really going to get to most of them before the end of the show. So I think I'll just save I'll save them, the ones that you don't answer, and we'll do them at the end.
Good, thank you. So what we'd like to do is just really quickly, without embellishing a lot of the details, is take you step by step through how a cold-in-place recycling job gets built so you understand it. The first thing that we do is we go out and we drop and plate all of the existing utilities. Manholes, catch basins, we drop water valve gate boxes, gas gate boxes. We drop and plate those down below the depth of the recycle. When we first started looking at the process, we said, geez, that's going to add a lot of project cost, having to drop and plate and then rebuild all those structures. Maybe we can figure out a recycling process to come along with a milling drum and then raise it and go over each of these structures. But as we thought about that, we said, you know, most of those 15, 20-year-old structures are already in bad shape anyways. So go out and do a beautiful recycling job and leave those old beat up structure tops in place probably doesn't make a lot of sense. So we've chosen to drop and plate. And sure enough, as we're out there adjusting these utilities, we usually find a lot of ugly ones. And what would be the first thing to go on a mill and fill job or a recycle job would be, in many cases, those areas around those utilities that didn't get rebuilt. So after we have the utilities all dropped and plated, on some jobs we'll have to pre-mill. This job here was the Massachusetts DOT job in Manchester by the Sea. And their goal was to apply an 1.25 inch thick hot mix overlay to the recycle job when we were done with that, and match up all the existing driveways. You can see this driveway on the right here, and side roads. So what that requires is removing some materials ahead of recycle, and that's what this mill is doing here. The smaller milling machine, it's got a 4-foot wide cutter head. We do the math to figure out how much material has to be removed, and we go out ahead of the recycler, taking material away so that we can match up grades that we need to match up. Following the pre-milling operation, the next thing we do, most of our jobs require 1% Portland cement as part of the mix design. So right behind the pre-mill is this cement spreader truck, putting down, generally it's about 1 pound per square yard of Portland cement for every inch of recycled thickness. Behind that comes the recycling machine, and of course this is what the pavement looks like after it's been ground up. It looks like a milled surface. Those millings are then put inside the cutter housing and blended with that foamed asphalt that we looked at earlier, all that bubbled up foamed asphalt, creating the mortar balls. Then that rejuvenated mix is fed by conveyor directly into the paver hopper that you see here. And after that, it looks like almost like any other paving job. Here's what the mat looks like behind the paver. And here's a close-up of that mat. I mentioned earlier, the foamed asphalt doesn't provide a continuous total encapsulation or coating. So sometimes you'll go on a job and it'll look almost too dry, like there's not enough asphalt cement in it, and you see uncoated particles, but that's supposed to be, that's how it's supposed to look. That's that whole spot welded, non-continuous coating concept. Almost like a binder, like a dry binder mix is what it typically looks like behind the paver screed. And then it's all about compaction. I mentioned earlier, most jobs are in the 3-inch to 5-inch thick range. So you got to have some real good compaction to make sure we get good densities of that layer thickness. So the first roller on the job is this HOM 120i roller. That has about a 14-ton static rating. He's pretty close behind the screen of the paver. And then kind of a unique roller that we use at our jobs is this Sakai. It's unique because it's rubber tired, as you see, but it's also vibratory. And in full vibe mode, it's applying a static equivalent pressure of 27 tons of compaction. So that allows us to really get good, deep, thorough compaction of these 3 to 5-inch recycle layers. On every job, we have one of the local testing labs sends us out a technician to work with our roller operators on the rolling patterns and checking densities. So we're doing that all day long. And once we have proper densities, the next step in the process is to put a fog seal on top before we restore the traffic. The fog seal achieves two things. One is it keeps the traffic from picking the fines out of the mix once it starts running on the recycled mat. And the second thing it does is it seals up the recycled mat from absorbing water in the interim of time before it gets the wearing course. Somebody had asked earlier about the timing. Ideally, you'd like to get the wearing course put on within a week or two. That's what we always recommend. 2 weeks at the latest, get the wearing course on to protect it from traffic and water. But sometimes we've seen jobs go as much as a month without that wearing course, and we don't like it, but it happens sometimes. And this fog seal helps to protect that recycled layer from any damage. Here's what that fog seal looks like close up, almost ready for traffic. And when it is ready for traffic, this is what it looks like. Ready for the raising of the utilities. And you can see over on the right-hand side of the picture there, there's a catch basin riser stacked behind the curb in the grass. So the next stage in the operation, after you see this beautiful recycled job, is we go out and we make a big mess in the middle of the road, raising all those manholes, catch basins, and other utility structures back to grade. This particular job was going to get an 1.5 inch hot mix asphalt overlay. So obviously the manhole tops, the manhole risers were all being raised to about 1.5 inches above the recycled layer depth. And of course, we compact new asphalt around all those raised structures. And we mentioned earlier, all CIR must receive a wearing course to protect it from moisture intrusion over the long term. A wide array of choices though on these wearing course options, from surface treatments, which some of our clients have used, to different thicknesses of hot mix asphalt. I would say about 3/4 of the jobs that we've done today have been 1.5 inch hot mix overlays, but we've also done a few with microsurfacing, and a couple of clients have also chosen ultra thin hot mix overlays.
Dan, can you talk a little bit about the life cycle of depending on what you put on it for a wearing surface? That question has come up in the chat.
Yeah, we've only been doing cold in place recycling now for 3 years. So for me to stand here and say it lasts 15 years, 20 years, 10 years, 30 years, all I can tell you, we don't have that experience yet, but I have traveled around the country pretty extensively talking with other CIR contractors and also a lot of agencies who've done CIR. And most people figure the CIR layer itself is good for about 15 years. If you put a thin surface treatment on top of that, then I would say you're not going to get any structural capacity out of that thin surface treatment. So I would, in my best judgment, call that a 15-year service life, plus or minus. But if say you were going to put 1.5 inch overlay on top of the CIR, I'd feel comfortable putting 20 years on that. I haven't done it for 20 years, so I can't sit here and swear on a stack of Bibles, but I feel comfortable making that representation.
Thank you, Dan.
So this was that first job we did back in Braintree in August of 2017. The town really wanted to get the bad road fixed. They were getting a lot of complaints on it, but they didn't have enough money to do a hot mix overlay on top of the CIR, even though it's about 20,000 ADT. So they asked us just to put a double coat of microsurfacing on, and we did it at night because of the high traffic volumes. That was in 2017, and I think they're planning 1.5 inch overlay this year over our microsurfacing. This was the second job we did, also in 2017. This is East Industrial Park Drive up in Manchester, New Hampshire. I think it was about 2 miles long, maybe 35,000 square yards, 50 feet wide, I think, edge to edge. Job came out beautiful, as you can see here, and I believe they put the equivalent of about a 2-inch overlay on top of that road. So thus far, we have done 29 different cold in place recycling jobs for 20 different clients that you can see listed here. And what I'd recommend our audience members do today is, if you know somebody on this list, please reach out to your peer, your DPW peer, and ask them about their experience. Or better yet, take a ride and look at the road. We'd love to meet you out on the road, do some appropriate social distancing, and share our experience on the job and the client's experience with you. But that's the 20 different clients we've worked for thus far. And we're fortunate today to have one of those clients with us, Francis Kane from Westfield, Mass. Westfield's done 3 jobs. So Art's going to spend a little time chatting with Fran Kane about their experiences with CIR.
Great. Thanks, Dan. Before I get to Fran, I just want to introduce him, let you know a little bit about his background and history. Fran is a retired Massachusetts National Guard member, and he began work in Westfield in 2003. He was promoted to the Deputy Superintendent of Water in 2010, and then most recently, now he is the Assistant Director of Public Works back in 2016. If you don't know Fran, when you see him come online here, actually he's up online now, you may recognize the face, because I call him the face of Westfield, especially in the wintertime. The media always seems to Fran seems to be the one that gets interviewed by the media all the time, and you see him on channel 22 and 40, etc. So without further ado, I think we'll get right into it, Fran. Why don't you first talk about, why you ever started a cold in place recycling program, and why specifically you chose North Road. You can see the photos of North Road up on the screen now. We have a before, or actually during picture on the left, and then a current picture that I most recently took on the right.
Well, yeah, and thanks, Art. Like everybody, involved with roads, potholes and torn up roads are a thing that we have to deal with. We were looking to get the biggest bang for our buck. We obviously had experience with the cold and the mill and fill, and it does work. It's kind of the go-to, but we just didn't seem to get the reflective cracking, and it just didn't seem to last as well. And they all look good when you first do them, but we just didn't seem to have a super big comfort level with that. And North Road came to be because it's a heavily traveled road. It's in the northwest corner of the city. It gets a lot of residential, city resident traffic, as well as the hill towns of Western Mass. People cutting through to go to work and shop and whatnot. So that's kind of how that road was chosen.
Great. Yeah, as you can see on the right-hand picture, it's there was a lot of traffic there. You have a Cumberland Farms on the right and another retail outlet on the left. Talk to me about how did the residents react to the cold in place recycling process?
Well, reaction-wise, as it was happening, everyone was thrilled some work was being done, but I think people were pleasantly surprised how quickly, it became a good road and wasn't super disruptive to their lives.
And did the residents care too much, or did anybody, even the employees of the town, the whole green process and the recycling process, was that a factor in the city of Westfield?
Yeah, I think in everything we do these days, green, to use the term, it is a factor, and you want to think about that pretty much no matter what you do. But be it, are you making the most economical drive with a city vehicle and getting the most fuel efficient use and whatnot out of the vehicle? So certainly anything we do has a green element to it, and this certainly fits that bill.
And then, so right after North Road, we did North Road in July 2018. You decided to do another project in 2018, and that was Shaker Road. I briefly touched on it with the section where we had to do a second mix design and add the layer of stone. And actually, this picture is in that section. Was there anything else different about Shaker Road than North Road that you want to discuss before we move on?
Other than the, in some ways, similar conditions, I guess, but certainly we needed to add that material, where the core samples, which are key, showed that it needed to be bolstered up with the added stone.
And actually, one of the questions that was asked, I can answer now about elevation and grade differences. Obviously in this section, we did actually raise the elevation of the road. It's a rural section, so we had the ability to raise a section of the road. If we couldn't raise the road because of curbing or things like that, we do pre-milling. I think Dan might have already mentioned it, ahead of the operation to maintain those existing elevations. here on this project, we were fortunate enough to be able to raise the elevation of the road, so it worked out well. Any other, yeah, can we go to the next slide there? And last year you did Northwest Road, and I just want to comment real quick because as you can see from the picture on the left, everybody's immediate reaction is probably full. Yeah, we have to do full depth reclamation on that. Can you talk about what you were thinking of doing to this road before you considered the cold in place?
Yeah, I mean, typically that would have more likely been a mill and fill, to be honest with you. It does see a fair amount of traffic, but that's probably how that would have gone, I'm sure. Again, the cold in place afforded us to get, you know, a quality job and get it done quickly, as well as you can see a mill and fill, all that reflective cracking and whatnot with those potholes. It would just came right back. It wouldn't have lasted, that's for sure.
And the picture on the right, just so everybody understands, the picture is taken from the same area, just from different directions. So on the picture on the right, on the left-hand side, there actually was a swale there, and you guys actually improved the drainage there quite a bit, and that really improved, you know, this section of roadway.
Yeah, and that's kind of key with any project, but certainly go ahead of this, you know, cold in place or whatever the process will be, and get some of the drainage and, you know, sides of the road taken care of, so it's a more, you know, complete job when you're done.
Great. Well, anything else you want to add, Fran, before we move on? We're about quarter of, getting a little bit late.
No, I just think we've been happy with it so far. You know, certainly professionalism, you know, that's exhibited by all the folks that we dealt with while this was happening was great. And yeah, we're pleased so far. And I think it allowed us to get some mileage, you know, taken care of in a cost-effective way.
Great. I appreciate it very much, Fran. Dan, we'll turn it back over to you.
All right. Thank you, Fran. Thank you, Art. Always great to hear real job stories. So we appreciate your involvement and your input. So I'd like to close out today by talking about some of the reasons why we think you might want to consider adding CIR with foamed asphalt to your pavement management programs. The first reason I think is because it's it creates a very durable process. You know, we talked about service lives earlier. We talked about the slow rate of reflective cracking. At the end of the day, we know we can't take beat up bad roads and fix them with mill and fill. We can fix them for a year, 2 years, maybe 5 years, but to spend all that money on that short-term solution, not the right thing to do. So if we need something more durable, we don't always have to default to FDR. We can use CIR, as you saw in some of those pictures from Westfield and other jobs that we've done. The second reason, big reason, getting bigger and bigger all the time. You know what it's like when you disrupt the residents, disrupt motorists. I've been there. I know people squawk. Everybody wants the roads fixed, but nobody wants any inconvenience whatsoever. So this particular job was one that we did in 2018 in Milford, Mass. This is Medway Road. If any of you are familiar with Medway Road, it's right off Interstate 495. It was about a mile long, very busy commercial corridor, mile long, 4 lanes wide. We were in and out of this job with dropping structures and plating them, recycling them, raising those structures back to grade in a little over a week. And I don't know how long it took for the hot mix paving contractor to come in and then overlay. They did that for the town, not for us on that job. But probably within 2 weeks, 3 weeks at the most, the entire job was done. And if that had been a reconstruction job, we know what a nightmare it would have been and the impact it would have had on the people who use this road and all these adjacent businesses. So a very, very quick process and much less disruptive than other alternatives, even less disruptive than milling and paving. And milling and paving, unless we went really deep on this job, wouldn't have been enough. It would have been a short-term fix. We talked about the green benefits. We're hearing more and more and more about it every year. Communities, elected officials committing to reduce their community's carbon footprint. Another very helpful and interesting tool on that website I mentioned earlier, roadresource.org, is what they call a sustainability calculator. And you can use that sustainability calculator to compare two side-by-side rehabilitation options, or really any two roadway treatment options that you want. And it'll actually show you not only the cost comparison between those options, but also the greenhouse gas emissions between those. Depending on what you're comparing it against, CIR can reduce greenhouse gas emissions by up to 90%. So more and more people care about that or paying attention to it. It's a nice selling point for you in your community to explain why you chose this process. But the number one green thing I think I hear when I talk to public works directors is they don't have enough money to do everything they want to do. That's why we have these bad roads to begin with. It's not because we haven't wanted to do our job, we haven't been able to do our job, because we haven't had enough money. And I think that's the number one reason why you should consider looking at CIR, especially looking at CIR as a replacement for FDR where it's appropriate, where you have a solid subgrade and you're just looking to rehabilitate the beat up layers of pavement. We did a job last year in Randolph, Massachusetts, and we were told by our client there, Keith Nastasia, that he had gotten a proposal to do a reclamation or reconstruction. It was around $850,000, somewhere in that range. And we ended up doing the cold in place recycling plus an 1.5-inch hot mix overlay for right around $450,000. So just a little more than half that reconstruction reclamation cost. And the job came out beautifully. I think everybody in the community was very happy with it. So don't always think you need to use FDR for bad roads or a deep mill and fill. This is a very appropriate process, and it's going to save you a ton of money. So we hope you consider adding the cold in place recycling process to your toolbox. For those that would like to get out and see the process in action, we have 4 jobs coming up in the next month and a half or so. We're going to do 2 jobs for the Massachusetts DOT. I mentioned earlier they had done a job in Manchester by the Sea back in 2018. They're very happy with the process, as they decided to do 2 with us this year. You can see the first 2 on the list, Revere and Haverhill. You can see the route names and route numbers there and the limits of the job. I think we're going to start in Revere on May 18th. We have to wait until it gets a little warmer. You'd like to have ideally 50, 55 degree ambient and pavement temperatures, and it's supposed to get cold again this weekend, so that might get pushed back a bit, but get in touch with one of us at Indus, and as we get closer to the job, we can firm up that date. We go from Revere to Haverhill, then we're going back to Milford. I just showed you a picture of Medway Road in Milford that we did back in 2018. They're doing another project this year, Cedar Street, another very busy road in the community. And then from there, we're headed out to the town of Ludlow to do Fuller Street. So please, please, please either give us a call. If you know somebody in those communities, feel free to give them a call, and we'll see if we can host your visit to see the process in person with some proper social distancing. A couple other resources you can check out. We, about a month ago, I think it was, we finished a new video of the cold in place recycling process. It's only 3 minutes long. You can see it's on our website on the cold in place recycling page. Check it out. It might give you some more information that we didn't cover today. And then I mentioned a few times this roadresource.org website. There's a whole section of that website devoted to cold in place recycling. Everything you could possibly want to know about it is there on that website, and we'd encourage you to look at it. Lastly, we want to let you know that we're available if you'd like us to come out and maybe evaluate candidates and persons in your community, roads that you were considering either a shallow mill and fill. If you'd like us to look at those and evaluate whether they're cold recycling candidates or not, we'd be happy to do it. Our phone numbers and email addresses are here on this screen. You know how to get a hold of us. Happy to come out and look at something. If we didn't cover something, I think we've got a few minutes left here. We'll try to answer as many of the questions that came in as we can. But feel free to email them to us, call us. We're here to answer your questions. I know sometimes bringing a new process fully before you jump out on a limb and try something like this. That's why we had this webinar. We wanted to answer as many of your questions as we could. And lastly, we just wanted to stay safe. You know, we're all in this together. We'll get through it. We'll be better. And when we get out the other side, we're going to have some bad roads to deal with. We'd like to help you fix those bad roads as cost effectively as we can. So with that, I'll ask Art, do we have more questions to answer?
We do. There's quite a few left that have to do with cost, Dan, and good job size. You know, what's a good job size to make a productive, efficient project?
Cost varies. You can imagine smaller jobs are more per square yard than larger jobs because it's a huge mobilization expense with a big crew, lots of big heavy equipment. I think I heard somebody one time say close to $10,000, a typical mob cost. So we want to spread that over as many square yards as we can. I won't say we have a minimum job size. I think we might have done a 7,000 or 8,000 square yard job. That's smaller than we'd like to do, but if we can help somebody out, we will, if we have scheduling capacity to do the treatment. Other things that impact job costs are things like location. It's a lot slower and therefore more costly to recycle in an urban environment with a lot of side streets, driveways, utility castings, all those things that slow you down. Whether you're a milling and paving contractor or a recycling contractor, those are slower jobs and more expensive jobs to complete than a more suburban or rural location. The other big factor that affects cost is the depth of recycle. It's less expensive to recycle 3 inches deep than it is 5 inches deep because of those stabilizing additives I mentioned. Typically, the asphalt cement goes in at anywhere between 2 and 2.5% by weight of the wrap, and the Portland cement typically goes in at 1%. So the weight of the wrap at 3 inches is less than it is at 5. So those are the big factors that affect cost. If you held me to a cost that I thought was kind of mid-range, I'd say maybe 10, 11 bucks a square yard is probably mid-range cost for cold in place recycling, but there's pluses and minuses depending on all those factors and a few others that I just mentioned to you. Any other questions, Art?
I think there's one back from the beginning. I think you answered it, but how much asphalt did you start with to end up with 4.5 inches of base?
4.5, but that might be that was the Braintree picture, I think. That measured 4.5. There's typically about a 10% expansion factor to the recycling process. So we probably, and that road was quite variable, as I mentioned. We're surprised often at the variability of road thicknesses, but where that particular chunk came from, it was probably 4 inches thick when we started the recycling. It expanded roughly 10% from 4 to 4.5 inches thick. So that'd be my best guess on that one.
And then lastly, you know, if you do end up getting into the sub-base material below the asphalt, if you're doing a job that's fairly thin, how do you address that? I can speak a little bit on that because I had a project where we started to get into the base, but it was recognized by our staff in the field, and they actually lifted the unit up a little bit to get out of the base. You want to expand on that, Dan?
Yeah, we definitely, the deepest we want to go is the bottom of the asphalt layer, because once you get into the base, that's a totally different mix. You're starting to blend fines from the underlying soils into the asphalt. It'd be a whole new mix design. That's what FDR is. It's a combination of underlying soil and the pavement layer. This is CIR. We're just recycling the pavement. So that's why, we extensively core so that we know as much as we can about the thickness of the existing asphalt. And it's also why, as you mentioned on your job, as soon as they see that milling head start to get into the underlying soil materials, they raise it. We don't want those materials in our CIR layer.
I think that's pretty much, I think we've answered pretty much all the rest of the questions, I believe.
Well, again, thank you for everybody. Don't hesitate to reach out to us, call us direct, email us if you have questions. We appreciated you being here today. Stay safe, and hopefully we'll see you sometime soon. Thank you.